Good day. As you will of course all recall from my previous video, the last couple of days have seen a major show of force by the Chinese military in and around Taiwan. Specifically on Friday and Saturday, the Chinese Air Force deployed large numbers of combat aircraft inside Taiwan's air defense identification zone in a clear show of force against both the authorities in Taiwan and against the United States, whose aircraft carriers are reportedly also in the region. And in that video, I linked this show of force by China to the fact that there had been recent extremely difficult, perhaps even acrimonious talks between the US and Chinese militaries, which have been reported both by the US government and by the Chinese Foreign Ministry, and which appear to have ended in angry deadlock. Anyway, subsequent to these Chinese military deployments around Taiwan, subsequent to that show of force by China around Taiwan, we've now had an exceptionally strong statement from the US State Department. I think this is the harshest or strongest statement the US has made about China in this format since the beginning of this new administration. And I'm going to read it out in full. It reads as follows. The United States is very concerned by the People's Republic of China's provocative military activity near Taiwan, which is destabilizing, risks miscalculations, and undermines regional peace and stability. We urge Beijing to cease its military, diplomatic, and economic pressure and coercion against Taiwan. We have an abiding interest in peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. We will continue to assist Taiwan in maintaining a sufficient self-defense capability, and we will maintain our commitments as outlined in the 3 communiques, the Taiwan Relations Act, and the 6 assurances. The US commitment to Taiwan is rock solid and contributes to the maintenance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait and within the region. We will continue to stand with friends and allies to advance our shared prosperity, security, and values and deepen our ties with democratic Taiwan. Now, that is an extraordinary statement, and one which the Chinese, in turn, are going to find quite exceptionally provocative. First of all, regardless of what you think about the Chinese show of force, the Chinese undoubtedly feel that their latest actions with respect to Taiwan are China responding to steps taken both by the Taiwanese authorities and by the United States. In the case of the Taiwanese authorities, to try to move towards outright secession from China. In the case of the United States, to support Taiwan, which of course China sees as a breakaway province from China. So the Chinese will probably react strongly to the description of their actions as provocative military activity, which is destabilizing, risks miscalculations, and undermines peace, regional peace and stability. So far as the Chinese are concerned, it is the United States which, by deploying forces around Taiwan and by supplying weapons to Taiwan, is engaging in provocative military activity and which is destabilizing the region and risking miscalculations and which could undermine regional peace and stability. There is a further point, which is the Chinese will certainly not take kindly to the urging, as the statement puts it, to cease military, diplomatic and economic pressure and coercion against Taiwan. As far as China is concerned, Taiwan is a breakaway province, and what China does with respect to Taiwan is an exercise by China of its sovereignty and a protection by China of its territorial integrity. So again, the Chinese will not take kindly to that part of the statement either. But it is the second paragraph that is the truly incendiary one, because it talks about assisting Taiwan in maintaining a sufficient self-defense capability. It speaks of the United States' commitment to Taiwan being rock solid, and it speaks of Taiwan as a friend and ally, and talks about sharing prosperity, security, and values with democratic Taiwan. In other words, it treats Taiwan as an ally, as in effect an independent country, and it makes it clear that the United States and Taiwan share values which override other issues and which bind the two together by implication against China. Over and above and on top of all of that, there is no statement in this paragraph, no reference in this paragraph to the United States recognizing the one China policy, accepting that China has ultimate sovereignty over Taiwan. There is no acknowledgement of Chinese opinions on that issue. In fact, this statement could be seen as a further sign that the United States is edging towards recognizing Taiwan's eventual independence of China. Now that, as I said, for the Chinese is a red line. The Chinese will not accept it. If that step is ever taken, then it seems to me that sooner or later some sort of military conflict in the Taiwan Strait becomes all but inevitable. Now, why is this happening? Why is the United States making extraordinary comments like this? Well, I think firstly, there is no doubt at all that the United States has been extremely angered and perhaps alarmed by these Chinese military deployments. It sees them as a very strong action by China, which of course they are, and it feels that it must make at least verbal statements to counterbalance these Chinese moves. A failure to do so might provoke a crisis of confidence within Taiwan itself and might undermine the government there. It might also shake faith in the United States across the region. So we see the United States responding in part, I suspect, very strongly to Chinese actions because the United States feels that it must do so. However, I think it goes far beyond that. And this is where we come back to this point that this statement does not appear to recognize the one China position. It seems to be treating Taiwan as an independent state. And once again, it makes references to values, something which the Chinese will never expect, and makes the exceptionally provocative reference to Taiwan as democratic Taiwan, by contrast implicitly with authoritarian or autocratic China. So what I think is happening here is that we see a major conflict within the administration. We saw a couple of weeks ago how President Biden telephoned President Xi Jinping of China, spoke about the need to preserve peace and stability in the Pacific, spoke apparently, according to the Chinese readout, about the United States adhering to the one China policy. He seemed to be anxious to damp down tensions with China. And we've seen some US military officials, such as, for example, General Hyten, talk in the same way. They have taken stock of the fact that recent war games carried out in the United States, which strategize a conflict in the Taiwan Straits, always end with China achieving a military victory. But against that, we have the hardliners, very strong in the State Department, but also, I suspect, present to some extent within the Pentagon and perhaps in the intelligence agencies, who see conflict not just in geopolitical, but also ideological terms, who generally believe in this great moral struggle between the democratic West, led by the United States, and authoritarian and autocratic China, and who are maneuvering to try to support Taiwan in that particular struggle. Taiwan being, of course, a country which, as this statement says, they acknowledge or accept as democratic and therefore a US ally. Now, we've seen repeated indications that this hardline anti-Chinese ideological faction exists. We saw right at the start of this administration, an article appearing on the Atlantic Council website, penned by somebody calling themselves Anonymous, in which that person, whoever he was, wrote about China in apocalyptic terms and spoke of Xi Jinping in particular as the latest in a long line of authoritarian and autocratic rulers who is supposedly challenging the United States in some sort of pursuit of a strategy for world dominance. So we saw that article appearing right at the start, just after the new administration had taken office, and it was clear to me at the time that that article was penned by somebody prominent within the administration. I speculated that it might be Tony Blinken himself, that's to say the Secretary of State. He has certainly talked like this on some occasions. It could also be Jake Sullivan, the United States' National Security Advisor, or it could be someone else whom I just don't know of. But anyway, that it was somebody senior in the administration, of that I have no doubt at all. And we also saw how directly after that conversation between Biden and Xi Jinping, in which Biden apparently was making conciliatory statements to Xi Jinping, suggesting to Xi Jinping that the two of them hold a summit meeting, a proposal which Xi Jinping refused. We saw that the very following day, leaks appeared in the media, undoubtedly sourced from the hardliners in the State Department, which confirmed that the United States is in private discussions with the Taiwanese authorities to upgrade the status of Taiwan's representation in Washington to the status of a Taiwan representative office, just one step below an embassy. And that, of course, also was something that the Chinese took strong exception to, as they made entirely clear. And it also obviously was intended to undermine any conciliatory moves made by President Biden himself in that conversation with Xi Jinping. And then, of course, the follow-up has been this extremely acrimonious exchange between the Chinese and American militaries. I should say that on the American side, though the discussion which took place was supposedly one between the senior officials of the U.S. Department of Defense and the Chinese Defense Ministry. On the U.S. side, the officials who were conducting the discussions appear to have been civilians rather than uniformed military. In other words, political appointments, the sort of people who presumably share the same ideological biases against China, the same conceptions of a values-based foreign policy, one centered on supporting democracies like democratic Taiwan, and one which also sees the relationship with China in geopolitical terms as part of a great existential struggle between China and the United States for world dominance. So it looked very much to me as if it was those sort of people who were leading the US delegation to those talks, and that in turn also explains why those talks appear to have gone so badly. And now we see the Chinese response with the military flights near Taiwan, partly in response to these difficult discussions with the United States and to the deployment of the aircraft carriers in and around Taiwan. And we also see the United States responding in return to those Chinese military deployments with exceptionally strong words of its own. Defiant language, in my opinion, language which says that the United States is going to double down on its policy. It's going to continue to support Taiwan, even as Taiwan edges towards outright independence. It's going to continue its policy of supporting Taiwan, a values-based policy, an ideologically based policy, one which treats Taiwan as an ally and as a democratic state, and which by extension treats China implicitly as an adversary and as an autocracy. So this is what we're seeing. Now I'm going to make a few quick observations. The first thing that I would say immediately is that I am normally somebody who supports countries talking to each other and trying to negotiate their differences with each other and trying to talk their problems through with each other. But that implies that there are some points of commonality between them. It's quite clear to me that at the moment, all that happens when the Chinese and the Americans meet is that they end up having a row. And I think that instead of that helping the situation, it is making it worse. The United States has been repeatedly trying to communicate with the Chinese ever since the new administration came into office, under this strange concept that it can work with China on some matters, those which are of interest to the United States, but can be adversarial to China in others. All that he's doing is aggravating the Chinese and making the relationship between China and the United States even worse than it would otherwise be. The Chinese are fully aware of the self-serving and manipulative nature of this kind of interchange, and it seems to me that all that the United States is doing by trying to engage China in that way is firstly find itself the subject of strong Chinese lectures and warnings of the sort that we saw publicly during the Anchorage summit back in April, and which we have seen since in the visit of Wendy Sherman to Tianjin and her meetings there with Chinese officials, and in the various other interactions that people like Blinken and John Kerry have had with their Chinese counterparts. All that, and also we have seen the Chinese, for their part, become angrier and ever more likely to distrust US actions and to take strong measures. So I think that given that the United States seems incapable of talking to the Chinese in a rational way, it would be far better at the moment if it stopped talking to the Chinese at all. Sometimes a period of silence between two countries when situations have become extremely tense but have not yet reached breaking point is better than discussions which simply end up in making the situation even more tense than it was already and causing each side to take stronger measures against the other. So I think the best thing to do for the United States is at the moment to stop these attempts to have some kind of a dialogue with China. The Chinese are not interested. They don't want a dialogue on American terms. So it's better that there should be no dialogue at all, given that the United States, for all kinds of reasons, for the moment, seems incapable of talking to China. Anyway, that is the first thing to say. The second is that I think that both sides need to start taking some steps to try to de-escalate the situation. And I'm afraid here, again, I'm going to focus principally on the United States. Now, I said in my previous video that the US doesn't seem to grasp how central Taiwan is for China. Any idea that the Chinese are bluffing over Taiwan is, in my opinion, a complete mistake. I am absolutely certain that if Taiwan does take steps towards it seeking independence from China, if it does seek outright secession from China, then sooner or later, probably sooner rather than later, there will be fighting on the Taiwan Straits as the Chinese take military action to bring Taiwan back into the fold. That will be a geopolitical catastrophe for the United States. At that point, the United States will find itself in an extremely difficult position, having to decide what it will do. Will it try to honor its commitments to Taiwan, commitments which this statement says are rock solid, in which case it could find itself fighting the Chinese military in the seas and oceans around China, where the Chinese have an inbuilt advantage, an advantage which will always grow? Do they escalate to the point of using nuclear weapons, which would turn a military debacle into a universal disaster? Or do they back down and be comprehensively and utterly humiliated? Given the stakes in this matter, the right thing for the United States, obviously, to do is not to escalate tensions, but to try to calm them down. That means, for example, telling the Taiwanese authorities that any step by Taiwan to secede from China will not be supported by the United States, that any step by Taiwan to secede from China which provokes a Chinese military response will not result in the United States coming to Taiwan's defense. And that also means the United States ceasing to supply arms to Taiwan, which could encourage Taiwan to take, or the authorities in Taiwan, to take steps which they might subsequently regret. The statement I have just read talks about miscalculations. Let me say clearly that the biggest miscalculation here, by far, is being made by the United States. It assumes that if it makes strong statements like this, the Chinese will back down, when, as the Chinese have repeatedly explained to the Americans, on this issue, existential to China, China cannot back down. Well, is the United States capable or able to follow my advice? I think the short answer is, for the moment, no. I think we are, at the moment, with a very weak and very divided administration. I think they have not understood the stakes of the game that is being played on the Taiwan Straits and the enormous dangers to the United States if this situation escalates out of control. And as a result, I regard this statement as a deeply ominous sign that we are still moving steadily towards an ever deeper confrontation. At some point, the situation is going to escalate. And then, it seems to me, we will find ourselves in a situation analogous to the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. And it will be very interesting to see what the United States does at that point. Now, I should say that there is a huge amount of mythology about the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. The narrative that has been constructed in the United States and which most Americans believe is that Kennedy stood up to Khrushchev and Khrushchev blinked first. In reality, the Cuban Missile Crisis was resolved through some extremely deft negotiation which took place behind the scenes, whereby the United States agreed to withdraw theater-based nuclear missiles from Europe, missiles which could reach Soviet territory, and also provide the Russians with guarantees that it would not interfere or attack Cuba. In other words, the Cuban Missile Crisis ended, in effect, in a draw in which the United States made real concessions to the Soviets in order to extricate itself and the world from an extremely dangerous situation, one which had been brought about in large part by its own belligerence. I hope that if, as we move steadily towards a second Cuban Missile Crisis, the officials in Washington will find that the same flexibility and the same ability to maneuver as the one that Kennedy and his team showed in 1962. The problem is that Kennedy, when he was president, was in full control of the US government, was making all the key decisions, and was, to say it straightforwardly, an exceptionally intelligent man. One can't be so sure that the situation today in Washington is anywhere near as solid as it was way back in 1962. It seems to me that we are heading steadily towards a further debacle in the Pacific, and that the consequences do not look good, and this statement points in completely the wrong direction. Well, on that rather ominous note, I'm going to end this video. We will see over the next few hours what the Chinese reaction to this statement is going to be. I predict that it will be a strong one. Thank you for joining me on this program today. I look forward to you joining me in future programs on this channel. I would also urge you to check out our main channel, the Duran, where I do programs with my colleague and friend Alex Christoforou. And please also remember to check us out on our new platforms, especially Locals, where we're increasingly publishing new content and exclusive content. I've just done a video, for example, about the Pandora Papers, this new cache of papers, which I believe is really intended and to expose Putin's alleged corruption, and which fails, in my opinion, to do so completely. But you want us to know what I have to say about that, please come to Locals. You'll find that exclusive video there. And you'll also find lots of activity by our Duran community, including Alex Christoforou and myself, but also various other people who are posting content increasingly on Locals. And also you can find us on other platforms like SuperU, the new free speech platform, and also on our other platforms as well, BitChute, Library, Rumble, ODYSEE, and all the rest. And lastly, if you want to support us, you can do so via Patreon and Subscribestar. You'll find links under this video, and you can also support us by coming to our shop, buying the amazing things that you will find there, our famous magic mugs, our hats, like this one, our hoodies, our sweatshirts, our t-shirts, and all the rest. Lastly, if you've liked this video, please remember to press the like button, and please also check your subscription to this channel. More on this issue in the Taiwan Straits soon, as well as, of course, videos on other topics. And I look forward to you joining me soon, and have a wonderful day until then.